everybody. What a week, huh? The Roundhouse is back in session. From clean air to clean reads, first week has had it all. Major progress, political theater, and bills that could genuinely change lives. I'm your host, Lucas Herndon. I'm our policy director here at Progress Now, New Mexico. And if you've been following our daily updates, you know that we are deep in the chisme here in New Mexico's legislature. For everyone else, buckle up. This is our week one recap of things happening up at the Roundhouse. Okay, let's start with the jaw droppers. Drama really kicked off last Thursday on the floor of the Senate as the Clear Horizons Act, which is SB 18 this year, was targeted by the Republicans in an attempt to kill it before it even got started. As it was being read in on the floor, Senator Woods attempted to send it to a third committee, which is a political tactic. Basically, most bills that you see move through our legislature are assigned two separate committees before they make it to a house to the floor for a debate. Getting assigned a third committee is a political way of sort of ensuring that a bill, especially in a 30-day session, never makes it to a floor to get passed. So anyways, that motion was defeated 24-11. Thankfully, all of our Democratic senators stood firm on that one, which is a good sign. It was a clear early win for public health over, obstructionism of Republicans. Speaking of being obstructionist, further obstruction came on Thursday over in the House as the House Consumer and Public Affairs Committee was debating the Immigrant Safety Act, HB 9. None other than John Block. Just a reminder, he was at January 6th at the Capitol. Spent almost 2 hours trying to keep this important bill from making it through the committee. Him and Representative Lord joined forces to basically ask every hypothetical question they could think of about this. Obviously, most of it was rooted in, in racism and again, obstructionism just in general. But thankfully, after all of that, and after the chair of that committee finally stepped in, they did get that HB 9, the Immigrant Safety Act, did get a 4-2 do pass recommendation. It has now moved on to the House Judiciary Committee, and so we'll bring you updates when we see that. So those are two of the big ones we saw. Let's see what else. Let's talk about some other progress we saw. And in the midst of the drama, there was some good work that moved forward by Friday. The full Senate passed SB 1, the Interstate Medical Compact, which is designed to tackle New Mexico's doctor shortages. Senator Trujillo closed the debate by thanking everyone for, quote, opening up healthcare to New Mexico, end quote. A powerful moment of consensus, really. Seems to be kind of the message that they always talk about. It's very rarely accomplished. So, kudos where kudos are due. What else? SB 2 also passed the full Senate. It allocated a massive $1.5 billion in incremental funding to the Department of Transportation, aiming to fund highway projects from start to finish, safe roads and solid infrastructure. It's always a win. That one didn't pass unanimously, but it was a pretty healthy vote in favor of that one. We also saw SB 37, the High Quality Literacy Instruction Act, pass through the Senate Education Committee. This builds on literacy standards and requires schools to notify parents if their child is struggling with reading and creates improvement plans for students with challenges like dyslexia, which that's good stuff. Good stuff. And let's see. Let's do. Oh, you know what? Let's do a quick call to action. You're here not just for a recap, but because you care about what happens in New Mexico. We're going back to the Clear Horizons Act. So your call to action this week. The Clear Horizons Act is scheduled to be heard Tuesday, January 27th, which is technically today. If you're watching this the day this video has come out. However, because Senate conservation agenda is pretty packed, there's a really good chance we won't see it till Thursday, the 29th. So be sure to call your senator, especially if they're on Senate conservation. Call in and ask them to support SB 18, the Clear Horizons Act. This is a rare opportunity for you to weigh in and really, to help protect our future, of New Mexico's air, land, and water. So don't let that moment pass, right? Okay, What else are we looking forward to after some stuff this past week? A couple bills that got numbers, but we haven't seen them move anywhere yet. Is SB 40, the Driver Privacy and Safety Act, and SB 53, the CHISPA Act. Both have been introduced and referred to committees. So when we actually see them up, we will be sure to include them in our recaps. And then there's a bill that got a number but hasn't been ruled germane yet, which is SB 39. Senator Steinborn's bill is seeking to regulate private microgrid power producers, which you can think of as like data centers building their own polluting gas plants. um, it's really any industry, but everybody's talking about data centers, right? Um, so it does have a real bill number, which is SB 39, but it has been sent to the Rules Committee, which means it hasn't been ruled germane yet. So hopefully we see that make it out of the Rules Committee to get talked about because it's really important, especially as New Mexico is looking down the barrel of not just one, not just two, but multiple data centers coming into our state. The risks to our water, the risks to our power consumption, the risks to our air, all very real. um, Definitely a big thing. So please be sure and and we'll be paying attention for that when it comes up. Um, okay, we are now going to move into a conversation that I had with one of our fellow staff members, Joe Cardillo, who is our deputy director. This is going to be a little bit more of a deep dive into something that's on everybody's minds with the news from this weekend. Unfortunately, as you're well aware, Minneapolis remains under siege from federal troops. With the killings of Renee Good and Alex Peretti, we are starting to wonder what is the final straw looking like for anyone who still supports this regime and DHS in particular. And Here in New Mexico, we're working on removing as much of our culpability as possible with HB9, which we talked a little bit about earlier, which would end New Mexico's contracting with ICE when it comes to the detention centers specifically. So here to talk more about that, like I said, our Deputy Director, Joe Cardillo. Welcome, Joe. All right. Hey, welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining me today. This is our week one recap of what has happened at the New Mexico legislature in the first week. We are going to talk specifically today about HB 9, which is a bill that will decouple New Mexico's future, hopefully, with ICE, specifically looking to um, decouple our the detention centers that ICE uses in the state from the state, right? From New Mexico profiting off of that. And while it won't necessarily remove, ICE or the federal government from our streets, it's a huge step in undoing some of the harm that ICE is doing here and from across the country. So, welcome. Thanks for joining me. What do you want to start with?
Yeah, no, glad to be here, and I think it's a really consequential topic. I've talked with folks about this before, but there is data that shows that this type of activity at a local and a state level does have an impact. So, for example, Prison Policy Initiative, did a bit of a write-up in December, just a little over a month ago, that found that, states that do address private prisons and other kinds of ICE activity are effective. And so this is a kind of, I would call it like a link in the chain of the way that ICE operates. And so it's not just window dressing. It doesn't, as mentioned, solve the entire problem. It doesn't address the unconstitutional and, in many cases, just straight up human rights abuses of federal agents on our streets. But it certainly is a link in that chain. And if you pull it out, it makes a pretty big difference. And I think that's a good place to start with, is just to kind of recognize that it does that.
Yeah, we are, really kind of living through this historic moment of some real power plays between, the power dynamic and the constitutional role that state government and federal government play. Do you want to like break down a little bit about what this looks like, what HB9 does in terms of, New Mexico asserting its authority over this, potential federal, issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start, I think, in kind of a simple place just to maybe help us all be kind of oriented. Like, what does it actually look like when people go into ICE detention? How does that happen? Just I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but like let's just think about for a second, some of the things that we've seen in the last couple weeks. We saw Renee Good murdered on the streets of Minneapolis. We saw another similar egregious incident. Alex Preddy, who's a VA nurse, an ICU nurse that was out there just trying to protect people and legally and constitutionally film as was his right, as was all of our right. And he was, grabbed, beat up, and murdered by federal agents. And so those are two, take the headlines kind of moments. But in the midst of all that, over the last few weeks, we've had other incidents of brutality, particularly in ICE detention facilities. We've had deaths in the last 6 weeks, from folks who are actually detained. And so when you think about people who are getting bullied, harassed, grabbed, beat up, sometimes they have valid paperwork. Sometimes they're US citizens, sometimes they're undocumented. ICE doesn't seem to care. They've just kind of going after everybody everywhere. When they then take a person, the sort of the pattern is they then typically try to take that person and put them very quickly into a detention facility or a holding facility. And then, this is a bit new, but they've started to try to move people very quickly, thousands of miles away from their current residence. This makes it harder for family to contact them and to hear how they're doing. It makes it harder to get an attorney. It makes it harder just to like even be able to show up in court or on a teleconference with the judge or attorneys. So it just creates this like additional barrier. And I would describe, our ICE detention facilities here in New Mexico. That's Otero. That's the Torrance County Detention Facility. That's the facility out near Grants. Those are our three big ones that do a lot of the ICE detention. There are places where people are being held specifically for that kind of pattern that I just mentioned. And so I think it's something all New Mexicans do need to ask is, first of all, there's a documented history of human rights abuses. Innovation Law Lab, who does some really deep dive work, especially around the Torrance, detention facility in Torrance County. They've been documenting that for years and years. Things like sewage running into cells, really bad food that's moldy, not being, detainees not being allowed to even talk to an attorney, all sorts of things like that, and that's pretty consistent across all of these sort of private ICE prisons. So there's a human rights component. And I think there's also the dependency of some of our cities and towns. Is this really the right place for us to depend on providing revenue to the economy or jobs to folks who work locally? And what are the moral costs of that? I think those are the kinds of components that I would think of when I think about like the way that detention centers work in New Mexico.
Yeah, gosh, all of that was really well said, and really it makes me, I live in Las Cruces, and I have attended ICE hearings here at our federal building, at our federal courthouse, and it's not uncommon if you go downtown in the mornings to see the big buses that come from the Otero County ICE Detention Center, bringing detainees to the federal courthouse. And yeah, it is. In our community here in Las Cruces, there's a number of folks who've, spoken very loudly about the sense of, it's a form of extraction, right? In the same way that New Mexico has suffered for decades, really, of under extraction industries, copper mining, oil and gas, coal, uranium. In this case, the extraction though is coming really, we're extracting human lives. We're extracting human beings from one place, and we're profiting off of that system, and it doesn't feel within the values that myself, my community, or most New Mexicans, I think, share, right?
I think that's fair. And, when you look at like the polling and the data is pretty clear when you look at what both New Mexicans, as well as Americans across the country think and feel and what we want. Immigration is a topic. People want pathways to citizenship. They want an immigration system that works. People recognize that the thing needs to be reformed. It has needed to be reformed for decades. And there's a lot of, ins and outs to how that would work. But just sort of ramping up violent arrests and detentions and just creating more chaos and this sort of sense of out of control, essentially paramilitary troops sort of roaming the streets. Yeah, that doesn't feel like something that's aligned for most people. And I think the data and the polling makes it pretty clear people don't want that. Um, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to really just go in and deal with a broken system, but this isn't that. This isn't helping. This is hurting that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's hurting the policy side, it's hurting the political will side, all while also, as we have as you mentioned and as we've all been seeing, and all while also actually physically hurting people. So,
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing, like there's really almost no part of this that's not impacting New Mexicans. Like, first of all, it's our friends and our neighbors. This is creating a lot of fear in our immigrant communities and in our schools, our small businesses. So there's an economic impact, there's a cultural impact, there's a human rights impact. And I mean, I just think it's, just on a basic level, like if we accept this and we accept these cruel and dangerous private prisons and that go with alongside with the activities of these sort of federal agents that are out of control, then we've lost our morality and we've lost our claim to be trying to be neighborly, to provide for our neighbors, to make sure that our economy works, to make sure that our businesses and our schools work. I mean, I think that's a real truth of it.
yeah, yeah, well said. I want to talk a little bit about HB9 specifically and what happened this past week. We saw it hit its first committee. It was in House Public Affairs, and we saw the two Republicans on that committee, Lord and Block, sort of do everything that we expected they would, in terms of filibustering it, throwing out all kinds of hypotheticals in an attempt to stall the bill. Ultimately, it did pass 4-2, and it's on to House Judiciary now. But you know, there's been a lot of rhetoric from the Republicans here in New Mexico about the bill, um, and I guess I just want to like pick your brain a little bit about, what do you see their main arguments as, and then specifically, I guess also from the Senate, we this over the weekend we saw Senator Townsend sent a letter to the federal government, sort of calling them in to interfere with New Mexico's legislative process around HB9. So just like, yeah, something. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, there's a lot. We'll just point over there. There's a lot. I mean, I'll say something really briefly about John Block and Stephanie Lord. And I think Jim Townsend kind of fits this bill too. Um, Lord and Block are, I think, pretty directly, they're sort of like made for TV MAGA Republicans. Like they never saw a spotlight or a grandstand that they didn't immediately want to capture. And, that's not me saying that. That's just like go watch the footage. I mean, there's really
Right.
no shortage of that. There's a now somewhat infamous photo of John Block, who, as you have mentioned, was at January 6th. There's a photo of him with like a big cutout of Trump with a machine gun, kind of behind him in his office at the legislature. So the guy loves that stuff, right? And I think they both kind of relish that, but that's in contrast to their voting record. Like, if you go look at the voting record of Stephanie Lord, who, Torrance Detention Facility is in her area. Um, that's a big part of the economy there. That's about, the detention center is about 40% of county revenue right now, which is not a small thing. Of course, there's jobs attached. But, Lord, what have been her efforts to diversify the economy in that area? She's voted no or didn't show up to pass legislation that, could have increased renewable energy companies and that kind of economic development work. And she sort of voted no on, some workforce training stuff. She voted no on raising the oil and gas royalty rate in New Mexico, which you probably know better than I do. These companies are multinational corporations that make billions and billions of dollars a year, and we still had the lowest tax royalty rate on them for extracting all that oil and gas, and she voted no on that. So if this is a person that cares about the economy of her constituents, she doesn't seem to show that in her votes. And so there's that grandstanding that's sort of in contrast. And I think Jim Townsend is sort of another example, and John Block certainly fits that kind of made for TV MAGA Republican. And I think you could probably say more about both of those, I think, just to kind of like hit that on the nose with them.
Yeah, really, it's I guess one of the things is that it's been striking to me is that, seeing I've been doing this a long time here in New Mexico covering the legislature, and I've sat through many a committee hearing listening to Jim Townsend when he was in the House and then now in the Senate. Um, and I have to say I've never, I don't think, felt more of a flip-flop from anybody really politically than this move from Townsend to kind of it reminds me of when my kid was little and would, run up and sort of tattle on somebody else at the park, because that's what it
Yeah, say a
sounds.
little bit more about that letter because I know
Yeah.
like we've touched on it, but say what was in that letter because I think it's
Yeah. So
and
what
John
we
Blocks and some other people have sort of invited the feds in, but I think it's good to just add that context about
Yeah,
Townsend.
we'll put it up on the screen here for a second. You can go find it if you
Perfect.
want. Basically, yeah, Townsend, he writes this letter to Christy Nome, director of DHS, and he uses a lot of legal jargon, but basically he's just the Democrats in New Mexico are trying to kick ICE out of the state, and we're mad about it because our jobs, and it really has that energy. It really has that like whiny little kid energy. Um, which kind of made me laugh. I mean, again, I've listened to a lot of Jim Townsend talking, and and he holds himself up as this like real statesman kind of character. And this was not that. This was whiny. I'm losing, and I need somebody to come help me. And it really, the thing that it made me think of is here in Las Cruces a couple of well, I guess a month or two ago now, our chief of police, who's a registered Republican, he did a similar thing where he made a series of social media videos, basically calling on the federal district attorney or attorney general, I'm sorry, to like come in and prosecute local cases under federal law, simply because he couldn't do his job, here as the chief of police, in and holding people accountable, right? So um, I think that the under normal circumstances, it would maybe be kind of funny, and we would enjoy sort of pointing out the hypocrisy of small government, states' rights, Republicans who are doing so much uh, now to call in the federal government. But I think that we really should have some concern, again, going back to what we've seen in Minneapolis, in across the country, really, right? And have experienced here. Let's not mince our words about it. The violence being enacted by the federal government towards our general populace, um, the fact that people like Townsend and Block, and Chief Story are calling that violence upon us is it's a pretty terrifying prospect, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think you hit that nail on the head. And I also just want to mention you wrote a really great blog post that came out last week about kind of all of the white nationalist, kind of just rhetoric and this, this racist, authoritarianistic kind of approach that the federal government has taken under Trump. And I recommend that people go read it because I think it really just sort of nails like how is that kind of coming to a head in New Mexico, which I think it is right now. It's going to be quite intense, and we don't know what the road ahead holds. But I think you laid that out in a way that's really important. And, when John Block, tries to call in, the DOJ as he did last year to go after some, people who are doing a rally at the state legislature last year in support of immigrants. When Jim Townsend tries to invite or call in these, federal resources, when, Story, as you mentioned, calls them in, they're calling in this bigger project because it's very clear. Like we know, it's not something that we're making up. This is just precisely what the Trump regime and all the people with him have said. They want to, they don't care if people are here, documented, undocumented, seeking asylum from violence in their own country. They just don't care about any of that. They want to remove somewhere between, depending on who you ask, 40 and 100 million people from the country, and they'll denaturalize people and take away citizenship if they have to do it. And that's what they've said. I'm not really doing anything. I'm not putting words in their mouth. That's the plan. That's the project. And so I think when people like Townsend Block and others call that in, that's what they're calling in. And I think that's, directly it confronts New Mexican values. It confronts the care and the strength that we try to provide to each other as, fellow neighbors in our state. And I think it's just really callous and unethical, and it's bad behavior. It's bad leadership. And I don't think it has any place in New Mexico.
Yeah, couldn't have said it any better myself. I think that more or less wraps us up for this sort of deep dive into this particular issue. Do you want to issue any kind of projections for what we expect the next week or so to look like in the legislature?
I, I'm not sure. I will say this on HB9. Please do contact your legislator. If they're in support, thank them. Please call them and email them. If you're not sure if they support, obviously call and email them and ask them to support it. Hold our legislators accountable. We've heard that, there is a pretty strong support both in the House and the Senate for HB9. So we expect that it's going to go the distance, but you really don't know until you get there. And I think this is a really important thing to advance. So I'm hoping to see that continue to move through committees, and get to sort of the finish line in both the House and Senate. And I encourage people to really focus on that because that's a big piece.
Yeah. Yep, well said. Yeah, add that to your call to action, folks. HB9, support it. It should be up next in House Judiciary sometime, maybe this week. We'll see. We will we will certainly keep you posted, and be sure to tune into our social media for our weekly or our daily recaps. And Joe, again, thanks for joining me. Anything final?
Nope, appreciate it. Glad to be here. Thanks for keeping folks surprised. And yeah, we'll keep everyone as updated as we can. And we can't catch every wild little chisme drama moment on the floor, but we're going to try to share as many of them as we can, both for accountability and also, we could all use a little bit of a laugh in these times too.
That's true. All right. Well, we'll catch you next week. Thanks so much.
See you soon.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for coming on and talking with us a little bit more about what is happening with the federal government, the occupation of Minnesota, and ongoing violence being directed at our own citizens, and for talking about it, what we're doing here in New Mexico with bills like HB9 in the legislature. We will be sure to keep you updated as that moves forward. Let's go ahead and wrap things up for the week. What did we see today, or this past week? We saw the attempted power grabs that failed. We saw marathon filibusters that were overcome, and we saw substantive bills on healthcare, education, infrastructure, and the environment all move forward. The atmosphere, surprisingly civil on its face. No one has been called a bloodsucking pig yet, but the political fights are definitely, clearly heating up. Do remember that SB 18 is up this week. That's the Clear Horizons Act. You have an opportunity to call your senator, ask them to support Clear Horizons Act as it moves through Senate conservation. The stage is set, the bills are in motion, and we will be here every step of the way, watching out for the good, the bad, and the jaw droppers. What bills are you most worried about or excited for? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our daily updates as session really gets going this week. Again, be sure to tune in to our daily recaps on all of our social media, and tune in next week for another long form one like this. My name's Lucas. I'm the policy director here at Progress Now. Stay warm, stay safe, and stay engaged, New Mexico.